Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well and you're practicing radical self-care. I hope you're getting out there. I hope you're getting exercise. I hope you're surrounding yourself with kind people. If you do not have a community to support you, then find one. You can find a community through 12-step recovery. There's thousands of Zoom meetings every day worldwide for Codependence Anonymous, Al-Anon, AA, if you've determined that you might have a drinking problem. Some people who are in these relationships or who have had childhood trauma, look at the statistics, very, very high rate of addiction for people that have had childhood trauma. So if there's like an eating disorder or a substance use disorder or, any sort of compulsive, sort of addictive behavior that you're engaging in that isn't good for you, then there is a community to support you for that and to get you the help that you need. I just figured I would put that out there just because I've been reading a lot on trauma, and it's very, very common for people that had childhood trauma to use some sort of addictive substance to cope. But typically it can become a far bigger problem than your original problem. I hope that for your sake that you're getting out there and you're doing some radical self-care. I hope that you're, getting some trauma therapy, EMDR, very helpful. Lots of different therapeutic modalities to help you. Somatic body work, very helpful. And I just hope that you're really focusing on self-care and healing the parts of you that need healing. So in this video, what I'm going to talk about is like some of the lessons that you can learn from being in a toxic relationship. And once you get out, some of what can happen when you do some self-reflection and you're able to look back and sort of forensically analyze the relationship you were in and your part and all those sorts of things. One thing that can be very difficult when you've been in one of these relationships is especially if you were maybe with a covert narcissist where you thought that they were like a good person, you thought that they were, honest, you didn't know that you were being duped, you didn't know that there was a double life, you didn't know that there was this duplicity going on. You might not have even known that you were being abused because psychological and emotional abuse is hidden. It can be hidden covert abuse. You're like a frog being boiled in water. You can be in one of these relationships for a really long time and you don't equate it with abuse, especially if you had childhood trauma where the abuse was much more overt. In my personal experience, I thought abuse was physical, sexual, verbal, because that's what I had as a child mostly. So I didn't really understand the nuances of psychological and emotional abuse where somebody is chipping away your self-esteem little by little by little over this long period of time. I didn't understand that silent treatment was abuse, that stonewalling is abuse. When you ask somebody a direct question and they don't give you an answer, they just look at you and blink and don't respond. That's maladaptive. That's very, over a long period of time, that can be very, very destructive. I didn't realize, in my case, I didn't know there was a lot of lies of omission. There was incredible plausible deniability because it was all about lies of omission and sneakiness and duplicity and secret life, double life that I wasn't aware of. So, yes, it may take you some time to look at it and go, hey, I wasn't being treated right in that relationship. I was subjected to manipulation, stonewalling, silent treatment, passive aggressive punishments, lack of sincere, honest communication, somebody who showed absolutely no authenticity or vulnerability. So you can find yourself, that you were in a relationship like that and you get out and it can take some time for you to look back on it and realize what was actually happening there, right? And that's, a process in itself. And so what often happens when people get out of these relationships is they go through the different process of the grief process, the anger, the bargaining, can't remember all the steps, but eventually they get into acceptance and they typically accept that the relationship for what it was. They accept the truth. And then, at some point past acceptance, they can start moving on. But something that I think is very unique to these relationships is what I consider like the loss of your innocence, maybe even the loss of your naivety. So if you, and I may have pronounced that wrong, I'm terrible at pronouncing words, but if you, you may have been in this world with this paradigm that, people that harm others typically do it because they're hurting themselves inside and they're, harming others, and there's no intentionality behind it. And sometimes when you look at these relationships, you're like, wow, that seems very intentional. And I think the jury's still out. I think it probably depends upon the type of narcissist or sociopath or psychopath, the levels, the degrees. It's a spectrum. I think a lot of what they do is because they lack self-awareness, and then some of them might do it very deliberately. What they do know is that it works for them, right? Manipulating people, gaslighting, lying, it works for them to achieve their primary aim, which is narcissistic supply, external validation. So all these things that they're doing, it's to gain that. And it works for them to get that. Manipulating, lying, having multiple girlfriends or boyfriends at the same time, they're getting a lot of validation, external validation. As long as they can keep things very compartmentalized and keep everyone unaware, then they really get what they're aiming for often, which is power and control over other people. They use people's emotions. They use the most precious thing, people's hearts and emotions, and they manipulate them to get their needs met. That's just what they do. Where they don't feel, the cluster B personality type, they don't really feel the same emotions, and they lie and say that they're in love when they're not, and they say all these things. Their actions don't match their words. So when you get out of this, you can have kind of a loss of innocence, where you recognize that there's some people that are just mostly bad. I mean, they're you could call it evil, you can call it self-centered evilness. I don't know exactly what the right definition is for it, but that not all people just hurt others because they're hurting, although a lot of psychologists will say narcissists are deeply troubled, deeply hurt themselves, traumatized, which they probably are, a lot of them, or some of them were just horribly spoiled and objectified in that way. But you do often have like a loss of your innocence, and you become hyper vigilant, because that's a trauma response where you're looking at everyone like, are you a narcissist? Are you a psychopath? Are you a sociopath? It's very hard to trust people because now you've had a paradigm shift. And I think what happens, the more that you heal, the more you connect with people that are kind, that do have good intentions, that do have good hearts, that are capable of emotional intimacy. The more you connect with those types of people, you will start to even out. The more you heal this traumatized brain, the less sort of hyper vigilant you will be when you're encountering new people. But I think a remnant that stays with you is, you may become more guarded. And, in some ways, if you're sort of deeply codependent or a total empath where you just think everyone's, you see the best in everyone, you think that everyone's mostly good, like maybe your paradigm needed to shift a little bit more into the center. I'm not saying we want to walk through this world thinking people are bad or being hypervigilant or wondering if everyone we meet is a sociopath, but I think it is important that we use discernment and that we start really tuning in to our intuition and listen to when the little voice tells us that, hey, this is not fair behavior. I'm not being treated with this respect right now, and I'm going to set some boundaries around this. And if this behavior doesn't change, then I'm going to exit this relationship, or I'm going to get away from this person. Because a lot of times, if you're sort of codependent, or if you have those characteristics, you feel sort of held hostage. You think that you have to stay in relationships. You think that you have to be a nice guy or nice girl. You think that you have to, make other people happy. And so sometimes you might even stay in relationships because, even though they make you feel very awkward or uncomfortable, or there's mistreatment in the relationship, you might be under the delusion that if you love them enough, or if you're kinder, then somehow they're going to change, right? Or you might feel an obligation to stay because somehow you think it's your job to love this person. A lot of times with narcissists, it's because you see that they don't have great relationships with other people, so you think that your love is what they need. They just need to really be loved. And I'm sorry, but that's not the case with these people. You are pouring all of your love into a black hole. These people are never satisfied. It doesn't matter what you do. There's the bar, you reach it, they move the bar. There's the bar, you reach it, they move the bar. There's no way that you can ever satisfy these people, because they have a internal state of constant dissatisfaction. And these are, they're hypocrites, right? So they expect a lot more out of other people than they actually expect out of themselves, right? So they shine that crazy, cold, perfectionistic light on other people, but they have the inability to look inward and to sort of self-reflect and self-analyze, and to see that, whatever light they're shining on other people, looking at other people's flaws, they have as, equal, if not many more flaws themselves. And of course, the key is, I think a lot of times, even in this human experience, is that it's very important for us to look inward. Like, I can't change you, but I can change me. I can look inward, I can self-reflect, I can figure out what my issues are, and I can do work on them. But I cannot change other people. And so I think a lot of times the delusion of these relationships is you stay in it thinking that surely your love is going to fix them or change them or make it better for them. And I'm sorry, that is a lost cause. You either accept people where they're at, or you let them go. And people can change. I believe everyone can change, but they have to want to change. And if, what they're doing is working for them, why would they change? So, I know there's some self-aware narcissists who have had they've just had so much loss in their lives, and so many relationship failures, and sometimes job failures, or so many different issues in their lives, that some of them actually look inside and go, what's going on here? Why does this keep happening? And some of them seek some spiritual or therapeutic help. Really impressed with that, because I think it's far harder for narcissists to probably change than it is for other people in general, because of that lack of introspection. But yeah, some of the things that you can learn after you get out of these relationships is to get the focus off of other people, get the focus on you. Change what you can, which is you. The serenity prayer: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A wise mentor of mine said, you know what things you can change? And I was like, no, what? And she's like, you. And you know what things you can't change? Them. So the wisdom to know the difference is, if it's me, I can change me. I can look at inside. I can do some introspection. I can figure out, what are my relationship patterns? What do I keep doing? How can I fix this? If I can't fix it on my own, I can seek outside help and get some help to change it. So that's something that you can really do, is learn how to keep the focus on you. Stop thinking you're going to change them. Stop thinking it's your fault. You are not responsible for other people's bad behaviors, actions, thoughts, feelings. You're not. Doesn't mean you can't be sensitive to people's feelings, but you're not responsible. I am responsible for my own feelings, for my own reactions to things, for the way that I behave and my behaviors. And you are responsible for your behaviors. If you get into a relationship with a narcissist, a lot of times you have the dynamic where the codependent thinks that they're responsible for other people's feelings, actions, behaviors. The narcissist takes no responsibility for their own feelings, actions, and behaviors, and they put them onto the codependent, right? That they do a lot of transference of their feelings onto other people, right? So they're constantly internally, whether this comes out externally or not, internally they are blaming other people for the way that they feel, and that is super unhealthy, and it's not true. So I'm responsible for me, and learning where I where I end and where another person begins, and avoiding these codependent and mesh relationships where we're taking responsibility for other people's actions, behaviors, feelings, thought process, is something that you can learn when you get out of these relationships, is how not to do that. Figure out where I begin and where I end and another person begins, and stop having over responsibility for other people, even for their perception of us. I'm not responsible for what other people think of me. My job is to be my true, authentic, real self, send that to relationships, and some people are going to like it, some people are not, and that's not my responsibility. In fact, if people don't like it, if I'm just being my real self and some people are just not going to like it, and that's okay. That's a sign that you're actually being your true self, because you're not morphing like a pretzel to get other people to like you. And then for sure, another thing that you can learn after you get out of these relationships is how to set healthy boundaries, how to figure out your personal, internal, external boundaries, your emotional boundaries, your physical boundaries, your spiritual boundaries, your financial boundaries. Learn what those are. In order to do that, you have to get really in touch with what your core values are, and make sure that your boundaries are in line with your core values. You can ask yourself, is this in violation of my core value? Is this supporting my core value? And you have to be able to set the boundary, hold the boundary, and have a consequence if the boundary is violated. Sometimes the consequences, if you violate this boundary, then I'm going to exit the relationship. Example of this would be if you are a monogamous person and you are in a relationship with someone and you tell them that your boundary is monogamy, and you make that very clear, and then you ask them to repeat back what you said. Yeah, they understand that your boundary is monogamy and they agree to adhere to that boundary, right? And then, you hold the boundary, and if they prove to be non-monogamous, the consequence can be that you will exit the relationship, right? That's a very clear boundary, and that would be the consequence. But if you say that you're monogamous, you explain that to them, they repeat it back to you, they understand what the boundary is, and they violate the boundary. And if you stay in that relationship, you had no consequence for the boundary. So this person, clearly has issues with respect to begin with, but they're not going to respect your boundary if there is no consequence for it. So when you say things over and over again, but your actions are different, you don't have those consequences, then they know that you're not going to uphold your boundaries. And especially if you're with somebody who's like cluster B, they love to violate people's boundaries. They're going to do whatever they want to do regardless of what your boundaries are. They have no respect for boundaries. Their job is, in their minds, is if you tell them no, they're going to try to get to a yes somehow, whether that means just writing over your boundaries or duplicitously, secretly violating them. It doesn't really matter. Like, they are going to do whatever they want to do. They don't have any respect for other people's boundaries. And I find that, in general, I think a lot of times, narcissists, they don't have good boundaries themselves. They're not, they don't really understand boundaries. They're horrible at them. They violate other people's boundaries left and right. They have no respect for people's personal limits or core values. And maybe that's because they don't really have their own core values. They have not clearly defined what their core values are. They don't set boundaries. They don't stay in line with them. And they have no respect for other people. So that's something that you can really learn when you get out of these relationships, is how to set healthy boundaries, how to find out what yours are, how to figure out if they're in line with your core values, and how to really do a lot of work around those issues of having porous boundaries. So yes, you might have to kind of summarize, you might have a loss of your innocence. You might have a loss of your naivety. You might develop much greater discernment. Eventually, your hypervigilance is going to tone down the more work you do around this. You may learn how to set much healthier boundaries. You might learn how to do a lot more self-care and stop putting other people's wants, needs, desires, feelings above your own. And you might learn to have at least the same amount of empathy for yourself that you have for other people. And you might also learn how to stop pathologically giving. It's very important that you have boundaries around giving. If you're codependent, you might have learned, you just give and give and give and give and give, and then you get resentful when people don't reciprocate. But that's on you to be to learn how to not be a pathological giver. It's very important. If you have a great deal of empathy, you still need boundaries around your empathy. So I don't know if this is helpful for you, but hopefully it is. And I hope you guys are doing really well out there. And I hope that you're connecting with good, kind, honest, decent, authentic people. Have a wonderful day. Bye.